Lucas had never known a world without Buddy. The black and white border collie had been with him for as long as he could remember. His shadow, his protector, his closest companion. From the time Lucas was a toddler, Buddy had been there, watching over him with unwavering loyalty. He wasn't just a pet, he was family. When Lucas took his first wobbly steps, Buddy was at his side, nudging him gently with his nose whenever he lost his balance. The dog's warm, steady presence gave him confidence, a silent reassurance that he would never fall too hard or stray too far. As he grew, so did their bond. When Lucas learned to ride a bike, Buddy was there too, sprinting beside him, barking excitedly as if cheering him on. Lucas would laugh, feeling invincible with his best friend by his side. And when Lucas was 6, it was Buddy who saved his life. It had happened in the blink of an eye. Lucas had been playing outside, chasing a butterfly across the front yard. He had barely noticed the car speeding down the street. But Buddy had. Just as Lucas's foot lifted off the sidewalk, about to step into the road, Buddy lunged forward, grabbing onto the back of his shirt with his teeth and yanking him backward. The car sped past, missing him by inches. That day, Lucas's mother had wrapped her arms around Buddy so tightly that the dog let out a surprised yelp. His father had shaken his head in disbelief, murmuring, "Smart dog." But to Lucas, Buddy wasn't just smart. He was everything. From that moment on, their bond only deepened. If Lucas was outside, Buddy was never far away, chasing butterflies, digging small holes in the yard, or stretching lazily in the sunlight. When Lucas was sad, Buddy would nuzzle his head beneath his hand, offering quiet comfort in a way that words never could. He was there for every scraped knee, every bad day, every moment of joy and adventure. They were inseparable. And just like that, 10 years had passed. Then one morning, everything changed. Lucas woke up to a silence that felt wrong. Too wrong. He was used to hearing the familiar jingle of Buddy's collar, the rhythmic sound of paws clicking against the wooden floor as he padded into the bedroom. But that morning, there was nothing. At first, Lucas thought Buddy was just sleeping in. Maybe he was curled up at the foot of the bed, enjoying a lazy morning. He reached down, expecting to feel the soft warmth of Buddy's fur beneath his fingertips. Instead, he felt cold stillness. His stomach clenched. "Buddy?" His voice was barely a whisper. The dog didn't stir. Lucas's chest tightened as he nudged Buddy's side, hoping, praying for some kind of response, a flick of an ear, a wag of the tail, anything. But there was nothing. Reality crashed into him like a tidal wave, sharp and unforgiving. His breath hitched, his vision blurred, and for a moment the world around him tilted. He didn't remember screaming. He didn't remember his parents running into the room, his mother gasping, covering her mouth with trembling hands. He barely registered his father's strong but shaking grip on his shoulder. All he could feel was the cold that had seeped into Buddy's body, the cold that filled the room, pressing against his skin, his bones, his heart. Buddy was gone. The vet had warned them it would happen soon. Buddy had slowed down, his movements a little more tired, his naps longer. But Lucas had refused to believe it. Buddy had always been there. He was supposed to always be there. But life didn't work that way. That afternoon, they buried him beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, the same spot where Buddy had loved to nap on warm afternoons, stretched out in the shade, watching the world with his wise, knowing eyes. Lucas placed Buddy's favorite toy beside him, a faded, chewed-up tennis ball, worn from years of play. He stared at it for a long moment before finally letting go, his fingers lingering on the soft fuzz one last time. His father hammered a wooden sign into the earth, carving Buddy's name with careful, steady hands. Lucas didn't cry. Not when they patted his shoulder, whispering words meant to comfort. Not when his father stood beside him, silent but strong, his presence grounding. But that night, When he climbed into bed and turned toward the empty space where Buddy should have been, the weight of it all finally came crashing down. The loss, the silence, the emptiness. The tears came fast and didn't stop. The first dream came 2 nights later. Lucas was standing in the backyard. It was night, the moon casting an eerie silver glow over the grass. The world was silent, heavy, as if waiting for something. Then he saw movement, a shape beneath the oak tree. Buddy. Lucas's heart leapt. His dog stood there, young and strong, looking at him with those familiar brown eyes. But something was off. Buddy wasn't looking at Lucas. He was staring at the ground. Then he began to dig. Dirt flew from his paws as he worked, frantic, desperate. Lucas tried to move, to call out, but his voice wouldn't come. His legs felt like lead. He could only watch. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the dream ended. Lucas jolted awake, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His room was dark, the only sound his own breathing. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, his mind racing. It had felt so real. The next night, the dream returned. Buddy was there again, digging. Only this time, he was more urgent, his movements more frantic. His ears were pinned back, his tail low. He looked, distressed. Lucas tried again to move, to get closer, but before he could take a step, he woke up. By the third night, he knew something was wrong. Lucas couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just the dreams. Something about the house felt different. He still expected to hear Buddy's paws on the floor, but sometimes he thought he actually did. A faint tapping sound, just for a second, before it disappeared. Sometimes when he was sitting on the couch, he swore he felt the cushion shift beside him, as if someone, or something, had just jumped up. And then, there was the backyard. One afternoon, Lucas sat on the porch, staring at Buddy's grave beneath the oak tree. His father had planted fresh flowers nearby, but the dirt where Buddy was buried was still dark and freshly turned. Then he noticed something strange. The soil near the base of the tree had been disturbed. A small patch just a few inches deep looked like something had been digging there. Lucas's stomach twisted. No one else had been in the backyard. His parents would have told him if they'd moved anything, and the wind wasn't strong enough to scatter dirt like that. For a second, he thought of the dreams, of Buddy, digging. A shiver ran down his spine. That night, Lucas finally told his parents about the dreams. He expected them to dismiss it, to say it was just his mind playing tricks on him. And in a way, they did. "I think it's just your way of dealing with missing him," his mother said gently. "Dreams can feel so real sometimes." His father nodded. "It's normal to hold on to things when we lose someone we love. But Buddy's at peace now, Lucas." Lucas wanted to believe them. He really did. But something about it didn't feel normal. Something about it felt unfinished. Buddy had never just dug for no reason. If he had spent his last days obsessed with that spot, then there had to be a reason. Lucas didn't know why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy wasn't done yet. That somehow, some way, he was still trying to tell Lucas something, and Lucas was going to figure out what it was. The dreams hadn't stopped. Every night, Lucas found himself in the same place, the backyard, standing beneath the towering oak tree. The world was eerily quiet, the sky painted in an unnatural silver glow. And every time, Buddy was there, not as the frail, aging dog he had last seen, but young, strong, and full of energy. But Buddy wasn't looking at him. Instead, he was staring at the ground beneath the oak tree, ears pricked forward, eyes sharp with urgency. Then, just like before, he began to dig. Lucas always woke up before he could see what Buddy was searching for. The dreams should have faded by now. That's what his parents told him. "It's just your mind processing grief, sweetheart." His mom had smiled at him gently, brushing his hair from his face. His father had nodded in agreement. "You spent every day with that dog. It's normal to keep seeing him in your dreams. "But Buddy's gone, Lucas." Lucas had only pressed his lips together and nodded. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. He had tried to ignore it. He really had. But the feeling that something wasn't right lingered, clawing at the back of his mind. And then, the puppy appeared. It was late in the afternoon when the rain started. Thick gray clouds rolled in, bringing a steady downpour that sent Lucas inside. He pressed his forehead against the cool window pane, watching as the raindrops blurred the view of the backyard. That's when he saw it. A small black and white figure huddled against the fence. Lucas blinked, his breath catching. A puppy. The little creature was curled up against the wooden slats, soaked to the bone, trembling. It looked no older than a few months, its fur slicked with rain, its tiny body shivering. Lucas didn't hesitate. He bolted for the door, ignoring his mother's voice calling after him. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he barely noticed. As he neared the puppy, something made him stop short. It had lifted its head, and it was looking straight at him. Lucas's heart pounded. There was something eerily familiar in its gaze. Not fear, not desperation, but recognition. The puppy didn't flinch when Lucas knelt down. It didn't cower or back away. Instead, it took a step toward him. "Hey there, little guy," Lucas murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. The puppy blinked up at him, then wagged its tail once, slowly. Something about that single movement made Lucas's stomach twist. He reached out a hand, expecting the puppy to sniff it cautiously, but it didn't. Instead, it pressed its nose into his palm, warm and familiar, as if it had done this 1,000 times before. Lucas sucked in a sharp breath. Without thinking, he scooped the tiny, drenched creature into his arms and ran back inside. The moment they stepped into the warmth of the house, Lucas's mother gasped. "Oh, poor thing!" She hurried forward, grabbing a towel. "Where did you find him?" Lucas barely heard her. His thoughts were racing too fast. The puppy allowed itself to be dried without protest, standing still as his mother gently ran the towel over its damp fur. And then, just as Lucas was about to set it down, it walked away from him, straight across the living room, straight to the corner where Buddy's old bed used to be. Lucas froze. His father frowned. "That's strange." Lucas's mother hesitated, her hands tightening around the towel. "Maybe it just likes that spot." Lucas wanted to believe that. He really did. But that night, when the puppy curled up at the foot of his bed, in the exact same spot Buddy had always slept, his doubts grew stronger. The next morning, the strange behavior continued. Lucas was pouring cereal when his father walked in, shaking his head. "That puppy's weird." Lucas tensed. "Why?" "He went straight to the kitchen cabinet this morning, the same one Buddy used to scratch at when he wanted a treat." Lucas's spoon clattered against the bowl. His mother let out a nervous laugh. "Maybe he can smell Buddy's scent there." Lucas didn't answer. His mind was too busy racing. That afternoon, things only got stranger. He decided to test something. Taking a deep breath, he crouched down beside the puppy and whispered, "Buddy?" The puppy's ear twitched. Lucas's throat went dry. "Sit," he tried hesitantly. Without a moment's hesitation, the puppy obeyed. Lucas's breath hitched. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. But then he tried something else. A silly trick he had taught Buddy years ago. Something no other dog had ever known. Lucas bent down, held out his hand, and said, "High five." For a second, the puppy just looked at him. Then, slowly, it lifted its tiny paw and pressed it against his palm. Lucas's head spun. This wasn't possible. It had been 4 days since the puppy appeared. Lucas had spent every second watching him, analyzing every move, every behavior. The more time passed, the more convinced he became. Then, on the 5th day, the moment that changed everything happened. Lucas had taken the puppy outside. The air was crisp, the sky bright with the afternoon sun. He watched as the puppy explored, sniffing at the grass, trotting around the yard. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Lucas felt his breath catch. The puppy stood completely still, its body tense, ears up, eyes locked onto one spot. The oak tree. Lucas's stomach dropped. He barely had time to process before the puppy took a step forward, sniffed the ground, then began to dig. Lucas's heart pounded so hard he thought it might explode. It wasn't possible. And yet, it was happening. Lucas sank to his knees, his eyes wide as he watched the puppy's tiny paws kick up dirt, just like in his dreams. It was as if the world had gone silent. Finally, the puppy paused, turning to look at him, and in that moment, Lucas knew. This wasn't just any lost dog. This wasn't just coincidence. Somehow, some way, Buddy had come back, and he was trying to tell Lucas something buried beneath the oak tree. Lucas knelt beside the puppy, his heart hammering against his ribs. The tiny border collie had stopped digging for a moment and turned to look at him, its brown eyes wide and expectant, as if waiting for him to do something. The air was thick, unmoving, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Lucas swallowed hard. He had seen this before, in his dreams. Every time he had closed his eyes, Buddy had been right here, digging at this exact spot beneath the oak tree. And now, Buddy Jr. was doing the same thing. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Lucas hesitated, then slowly reached forward, brushing the puppy's small paws aside. His fingers sank into the cool earth, damp from the morning dew. He dug carefully, his nails scraping against roots and loose soil. At first, it was just dirt, but then, his fingertips struck something hard. Lucas froze. His breath hitched as he dug faster, his hands working urgently now, moving the dirt away until the shape beneath was fully revealed. A wooden box. It was small, barely bigger than a shoebox, with rough edges and a rusted metal latch. Time had not been kind to it. The wood was discolored, damp in some places, but still intact. Lucas's stomach twisted. What was this? His hands trembled as he reached for the box, brushing away the last bits of soil. He hesitated before lifting it, as if somehow touching it would make everything feel even more real than it already did. A gust of wind rustled the leaves above, making the branches of the oak tree creak softly. Lucas looked at the puppy, who sat patiently, staring at the box with quiet intensity. Lucas swallowed hard, and then he opened it. The latch was rusted, but with some effort, Lucas managed to pry it open. The lid creaked as it lifted, revealing the contents inside. His breath caught. Inside the box was a bundle of old yellowed letters tied together with a faded ribbon. Beneath them lay a small silver locket, its surface scratched but still glinting faintly in the light. Lucas's fingers hovered over the items, his mind racing. Who did these belong to? Why had Buddy Jr. now, or maybe Buddy all along, been so desperate to uncover them? Carefully, he picked up the top letter, the paper brittle beneath his fingertips. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was still legible, elegant, careful, written with emotion. Lucas's eyes scanned the first few words, and suddenly, the world around him seemed to tilt. Dearest William, his pulse quickened. A name, a story, a past hidden beneath the very ground Buddy had once roamed. He kept reading. The letter was dated more than 50 years ago. Margaret and William. The names repeated throughout the pages. As Lucas flipped through the letters, the story unfolded piece by piece. Margaret had lived in this house long before his family moved in. She had fallen in love with William when they were young, but their love had been forbidden. Her parents had refused to let them be together. And then, the war came. William had left to fight, promising Margaret he would return. She had written him letter after letter, but she never knew if he had received them. The last letter, dated years later, was the hardest to read. I waited for you. I searched for you. But they told me you were gone, that I should move on. But how could I? My heart belongs to you. It always has." The ink was smudged in places as if the writer had been crying when they wrote it. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. Margaret had buried these letters here, as if holding on to them meant holding on to him. He glanced at the locket, slowly picking it up. With a careful touch, he pried it open. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph. A young woman, smiling softly. Margaret. Lucas exhaled shakily. This wasn't just a box of old letters. This was a piece of someone's heart. Lucas sat there for a long time, staring at the letters, the locket, the remnants of a love that had never been given its proper ending. He had so many questions. Had Margaret ever known what happened to William? Had he truly never returned? Why had Buddy, his Buddy, been so determined to find these letters? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do with them now? The puppy nuzzled against his side, letting out a soft huff, as if reassuring him that he was on the right path. Lucas carefully placed everything back inside the box and stood up. His hands were still shaking. He had to know more. His parents, they might know something. Taking a deep breath, he scooped up the box, tucked it under his arm, and turned back toward the house. Whatever this was, it wasn't over yet. And somehow, he knew Buddy wasn't done guiding him. Lucas sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, the old wooden box resting between his knees. The letters, still tied together with the delicate faded ribbon, lay beside it, along with the small silver locket. The weight of his discovery pressed heavily on him, a mix of excitement and unease coiling in his chest. The story written in those letters wasn't just a random love story from the past. It was a piece of real history, buried in his own backyard, hidden for decades beneath the roots of the oak tree. And somehow, Buddy, or Buddy Jr. now, had known it was there. Lucas traced his fingers over the worn edges of the locket, his mind racing. He had to know more. There was only one person who might have answers: his parents. At dinner that evening, Lucas couldn't hold it in any longer. "Mom, Dad," he said suddenly, placing his fork down. His voice was steady, but his heart was hammering in his chest. "I found something today, beneath the oak tree." His parents exchanged glances, clearly surprised. "What do you mean?" his father asked. Lucas took a deep breath, then left the table for a moment, returning with the wooden box in his hands. He set it down carefully, pushing it toward them. This. It was buried right where Buddy Jr. was digging. His mother's brow furrowed as she untied the ribbon, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the first letter. His father let out a low whistle. "These must be ancient." "They're from Margaret," Lucas said. "She used to live here, and she wrote them to William." The room fell silent. His mother slowly unfolded one of the fragile pages, her eyes scanning the faded ink. Lucas watched their faces closely, searching for recognition, for some sign that they knew what this meant. After a long pause, his mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret Turner." She looked up, her expression unreadable. "I remember hearing about her when we moved in. The woman who lived here before us. She never married, never had children. I think she lived here alone until the day she passed away." Lucas's heart clenched. She had waited for William. She had spent her entire life hoping he would come back. "She must have buried these letters," his father murmured, flipping through the stack, "to hold on to something, to keep the memory of him alive." Lucas nodded, his throat tight. "But why did Buddy—" He stopped himself. His parents already thought he was imagining things. If he told them Buddy had led him to the box, they would only say he was projecting emotions onto the puppy because he missed Buddy too much. But Lucas knew the truth. Buddy had wanted him to find this. That night, Lucas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that there was still something unfinished. Finding the letters wasn't enough. Someone had to know about them. Someone had to remember Margaret and William. Then he remembered something. His mother had said that Margaret never had children. But what if she had family? A sibling? A niece or nephew? Lucas sat up and grabbed his phone, his fingers moving quickly as he searched for records of Margaret Turner in the town archives. And then he found her. Margaret had a younger sister, and that sister had a daughter, Evelyn Carter. Lucas's pulse quickened. She was still alive. The next afternoon, Lucas sat in the passenger seat as his mother drove toward the small nursing home on the outskirts of town. She had been skeptical at first, but after reading more of Margaret's letters, she had finally agreed. "This might not be a good idea, Lucas," she had warned. "Evelyn is in her late 70s. We don't know if she'll even remember any of this." Lucas didn't care. He had to try. When they arrived, the receptionist led them down a quiet hallway lined with soft beige walls. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Old books, maybe. Then they reached a small sitting area where an elderly woman sat near the window, her gaze distant, lost in thought. Evelyn Carter. She turned slowly when they approached, her blue eyes sharp despite her age. "May I help you?" Lucas hesitated, then carefully sat across from her, placing the wooden box on the table between them. "I think this belongs to your family," he said. Evelyn's eyebrows drew together in confusion. Slowly, she reached forward, her hands frail but steady as she lifted the lid. The moment she saw the letters, she gasped. Lucas watched as her expression changed, confusion melting into recognition and then into something else entirely. Pain. "Where did you find these?" she whispered. Lucas swallowed. "Under the oak tree, in my backyard, where Margaret used to live." Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Margaret," she murmured. "She never let go." She reached for one of the letters, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. "She wrote these to William. She always talked about him, but she never told me she had written to him all those years." Lucas leaned forward. "Did she ever find out what happened to him?" Evelyn exhaled shakily. "Number." "She waited for him until the day she died. She never knew." Lucas's heart ached. It wasn't fair. Margaret had spent her entire life waiting for a man who never came home. And William? Had he ever even read her letters? Had he known how much she loved him? Evelyn gently ran her fingers over the faded ink. "She would have wanted someone to find these," she whispered, "to know that she loved him, that he mattered." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. He had done the right thing. For the first time since Buddy's passing, the weight in his chest seemed a little lighter. Evelyn closed the box carefully. "Thank you, Lucas," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for giving me a piece of my sister I never knew existed." Lucas simply nodded, unable to find the words. And at that moment, he felt it, the gentle press of something warm against his side. He turned. Buddy Jr. sat beside him, tail wagging, eyes bright. Lucas reached down, running his fingers through the soft fur. Maybe his parents would never believe it. Maybe no one would. But he knew. Buddy had led him to this moment. And finally, his mission was complete. Lucas sat in the car, staring out the window as his mother drove home. The weight of what had just happened settled deep in his chest, a strange mix of sadness and relief. The letters, the locket, the story of Margaret and William, it was more than just an old, forgotten love story. It was unfinished history, a life spent waiting, a love never reunited. And now, because of Buddy Jr., Margaret's story had finally been uncovered. Lucas ran his fingers over the old wooden box resting on his lap. Evelyn had insisted that he keep it, saying that Margaret would have wanted someone who cared to hold on to it. His mother glanced at him, her voice soft. "You did something really special today, Lucas." He nodded but didn't say anything. He wasn't sure how to explain what he was feeling. It wasn't just about Margaret. It was about Buddy. His buddy. Everything that had happened, the dreams, the strange behavior, the digging, it had all led to this moment. Had Buddy really come back just to help uncover this story? Had his soul lingered, bound by unfinished business? Lucas didn't know, but he did know one thing. Something had changed. As they pulled into the driveway, Buddy Jr., who had been curled up in the back seat, lifted his head. His ears perked up, eyes alert, but different, calmer, more at peace. Lucas had a feeling that when he stepped inside, things wouldn't feel so heavy anymore. Because maybe, just maybe, Buddy had finally found his way home. That night the house felt quieter, but not in the empty, painful way it had before. Lucas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Buddy Jr. was curled up at the foot of his bed, just as he had been since the day he arrived. For the first time in weeks, Lucas didn't expect to hear Buddy's paws clicking against the floor. He didn't feel the restless weight of grief pressing against his chest. It was different, softer, lighter. He closed his eyes, feeling sleep begin to pull at him. And that was when it happened. Lucas found himself standing outside, bathed in soft moonlight. The oak tree stood in front of him, its branches swaying gently in the wind. The air was cool, crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth. And then, just like before, Buddy appeared. But this time, something was different. Buddy wasn't digging. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't trying to tell Lucas something. Instead, he was just standing there, watching him. His tail wagged once, slow and steady. His brown eyes were warm, full of something Lucas could only describe as gratitude. Lucas took a step forward, his heart aching, not with pain, but with something gentler. "Hey, boy," he whispered. Buddy lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching as if acknowledging him. Then, for the first time, Buddy turned away. Lucas's breath hitched. Buddy had never walked away before, not in any of the dreams. This time, though, he wasn't disappearing into shadows. He was walking toward the light. Lucas felt his throat tighten, but he didn't call out. He didn't try to stop him, because this time he understood. Buddy had stayed for a reason. He had come back for a reason. And now that reason had been fulfilled. Lucas swallowed hard, watching as Buddy paused for just a moment. Then slowly he wagged his tail one last time and stepped forward, disappearing into the soft glow. Lucas woke up to the golden light of morning spilling into his room. For a moment he lay still, letting the memory of the dream settle inside him. He didn't feel sad. He didn't feel empty. He felt whole. A gentle movement at the foot of the bed made him look down. Buddy Jr. was stretched out, still asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Lucas reached down and ran his fingers through his fur. It was warm, soft, real. And for the first time since Buddy had passed, Lucas wasn't searching for signs. He wasn't trying to convince himself of anything. Buddy had been here. He had led Lucas exactly where he needed to go. But now it was time to move forward. With Buddy Jr., with the memories that would never fade, and with the quiet, unshakable truth that love never really leaves. Later that afternoon, Lucas stood in the backyard, the old wooden box in his hands. His father had built a small wooden shelf inside their living room, a place to keep the letters, the locket, and the memories of Margaret and William safe. But before he put them away, Lucas wanted to do one last thing. He crouched beside the oak tree, running his hand along the rough bark. This place had meant something. To Buddy, to Margaret, to William. Now it meant something to him, too. "I think you're at peace now," Lucas murmured. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves overhead. And Lucas swore, for just a moment, he heard the faintest echo of a familiar bark. He smiled. Not goodbye, just thank you. And with that, he stood up, turned toward the house, and walked back inside. Lucas had always thought that saying goodbye was the hardest thing a person could do. When Buddy passed away, it felt like a part of him had been ripped away, leaving behind an emptiness that no words could ever fill. He had tried to move forward, but the weight of grief had clung to him like a shadow. Every corner of the house reminded him of his best friend, the sound of paws that no longer echoed against the floor, the missing warmth at his feet, the absence of those bright, intelligent eyes that had always seemed to understand him. But now, for the first time, he didn't feel like something was missing. As he stood beneath the oak tree, looking out over the backyard, he realized something profound. Buddy had never really left, not in the way Lucas had thought. His love, his presence, it had been there all along, guiding Lucas, leading him toward something greater, toward Margaret's story, toward closure. And now Lucas could finally let go, not of Buddy, not of the memories, but of the sadness that had weighed him down for so long. The wind rustled through the branches, carrying with it the soft scent of earth and fallen leaves. He smiled. Not goodbye, just a new beginning. Buddy Jr. trotted toward him, tail wagging, eyes full of warmth. He had grown comfortable in their home, no longer the shy, lost puppy Lucas had found in the rain. Now he ran freely, full of life, his every move echoing a familiarity that Lucas couldn't deny. But the most important thing? Lucas no longer needed to explain it. He no longer searched for proof that Buddy had come back. He no longer questioned whether Buddy Jr. was a reincarnation or just fate's way of bringing him a second chance. He just knew. And that was enough. His parents had noticed the change in him, too. His mother had smiled more in the past few days, watching as Lucas played outside again, his laughter no longer tinged with sadness. His father had stopped looking at him with quiet concern, finally believing that Lucas was healing. The grief hadn't disappeared. It never truly did. But it had softened, becoming something warm instead of something heavy. Love never fades. It simply changes shape. One evening, Lucas sat in the living room with his parents, the wooden box resting on the coffee table. The letters had been carefully placed in protective sleeves, ensuring that time wouldn't take them away again. "We should do something with them," his mother said softly, running her fingers along the delicate pages. "Margaret waited her whole life for William. I think it's time the world knew about her love for him." Lucas nodded. She was right. Margaret's story wasn't meant to stay buried forever. His father leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Maybe we could contact a local historian, see if there are any records about William. Maybe someone out there knows what happened to him." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "You think so?" "It's worth trying," his father said with a small smile. "You've already uncovered so much, Lucas. Who's to say there isn't more?" The thought sent a thrill of excitement through him. He had spent so long wondering why Buddy had led him to the box, and maybe, just maybe, this was the reason. Not just to bring closure to Margaret's story, but to share it, to ensure that love like hers was never forgotten. A few weeks later, an article appeared in the local newspaper. It told the story of Margaret and William, of their love that had spanned decades, of the letters that had remained hidden beneath the oak tree for so long. People were captivated. Some called it heartbreaking. Others called it beautiful. But all of them agreed. It was a love worth remembering. And though no records of William had surfaced yet, something about sharing Margaret's story felt like the right thing to do. Lucas knew she would have wanted it that way. One afternoon, Lucas sat beneath the oak tree, Buddy Jr. lying beside him, his head resting on Lucas's lap. The sun filtered through the branches, casting golden patterns across the grass. Lucas ran his fingers through Buddy Jr.'s fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You did good, boy," he murmured. Buddy Jr. didn't respond, but Lucas liked to believe he understood. He looked up at the branches above him, watching the leaves sway in the wind. The same tree that had once been a place of loss was now a place of remembrance, a place of love that had never truly died. Maybe one day William's story would be found too. Maybe his name would be added to Margaret's letters, and their love would finally find the reunion it had been waiting for. Or maybe some love stories never need an ending. Maybe just knowing they existed was enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson Buddy had been trying to teach him all along. Life moved forward, as it always did. Lucas returned to school. He played soccer in the backyard again. He spent afternoons teaching Buddy Jr. tricks, laughing as the little pup tried, and failed, to catch a frisbee mid-air. He still missed Buddy. Some days the ache was sharper than others. But now, it didn't feel like an empty loss. It felt like a love that had simply shifted, changed, found a new way to exist. As the seasons changed and the oak tree shed its leaves, Lucas knew one thing for sure. Some bonds never break. Some love never fades. And some souls, no matter how far they go, always find their way back home. Some stories don't just entertain. They leave a lasting imprint on the heart. This heartwarming story is one of those rare narratives that go beyond a simple tale about a boy and his dog. It speaks to something much deeper. The enduring power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the invisible threads that connect us across time. At its core, this story is about unbreakable bonds, the kind that defy distance, loss, and even the limits of life itself. There's something uniquely profound about dog stories because they reflect what humans often struggle to express: loyalty without condition, love without expectation, and a presence that asks for nothing but to be near. Dogs don't just become pets. They become part of our souls, understanding us in ways words never could. But what happens when that bond is tested by loss? This story explores the journey of grief, healing, and rediscovery, showing that love doesn't vanish when someone is gone. Instead, it lingers, guiding, whispering, and sometimes even leading us toward answers we didn't know we needed. It's a reminder that love is not confined to a single moment in time. It moves, transforms, and sometimes finds its way back to us in unexpected forms. Beyond personal connection, this story also touches on the importance of honoring the past. It reminds us that stories left untold deserve to be heard, and that sometimes fate has a way of nudging us toward completing what was left unfinished. Whether it's through an old letter, a long-lost memory, or even the intuition of a faithful companion, the past often has lessons that are meant to shape the future. What makes this heartwarming story so meaningful is its universal message: love never truly fades. It evolves, shifts, and leaves traces in the people and places we hold dear. Some bonds are too strong to be broken, some stories are too powerful to be forgotten, and sometimes the ones we love never really leave us. They just find new ways to stay. Through the lens of dog stories, we are reminded of life's greatest truths: that love is eternal, that healing is possible, and that no matter how much time passes, we are never truly alone. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.